my name is Dawn. I am with ABC Board of Directors and Chair of your Safety Council, as well as your facilitator for today. I'm going to go ahead and get this meeting going. It is 11:01. I know this is a fun-packed meeting with our host, Eric, with L&I, our safety professional whiz kid, as I'm going to call him. I'm not going to have introductions because there's way too many people online, and thank you for attending. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. I will be monitoring your chat as the meeting goes on. This meeting is scheduled from 11 to 12:30. However, if for some reason it gets done earlier, then we get to move on to our other business. I will probably be checking out about 12:15. So again, just have some Zoom etiquette by muting your phone if you need to keep working while you're listening. At the end of our meeting, Tony will be sending out the PDFs that Eric will be going over, as well as this meeting will be recorded. So there will be a recording provided for you afterwards. If there are any questions after the meeting, please contact Eric or Tony. I'm sure Eric will be providing his contact information as well at the end of the meeting. So I'm going to hand it over to Eric and let him get going.
All right. Well, I'm not sure how much fun it will be, but we'll give it a go. I'm in a small room here in the Seattle office. It's a little bit echoey, about the best I can do. So, a few years ago, we started working on updating our construction fault protection rules. I think that initially came out in 2016, and that was a result of some concerns that federal OSHA had with that standard. And then in the meantime, we started working on that. OSHA come up with their walking working surface update for general industry. So with both of those, what we would call opens our standards to be updated. The department decided, based on stakeholder requests, to create one fault protection standard that applied to everybody. So with everything open, that's several years later, it's kind of where we are with this. Now, the scope of this project was pretty narrow. Not scope of the standard. Let's talk scope of the project. It was to address OSHA's concerns with our construction standard. Incorporate fault protection for general industry, or we call it fixed industry. Then we also have some change log issues. There's some errors within a standard per se. So with the scope was pretty narrow. So there's usually people, why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we doing that? Well, the scope of the project was very narrow. So what you're going to find in here is a lot of copy paste of what you're familiar with now. There are some differences, some changes that we'll talk about. But most people have done a number of these already. It's a lot of familiarity with some subtle differences to it. And then again, we can see here that it's organized in a little bit different manner. So with that, we sent this link out. This is from the Washington State Legislature site. The Code Revisor's Office, that's the group that handles the code, per se. And I like this site because of the way it's A, organized, and B, we have the ability to look at a particular section in HTML, which is a web page, or a PDF. You can do it either way you want to. You can also do the whole chapter as HTML or PDF up in top. So it makes it fast to be able to navigate. And this kind of issue that we have now with a lot of standards, you're going back and forth trying to find something. So for instance, if you wanted to find, and we looked at this a little bit ago, what are the requirements for a safety monitor system? Currently you're going to 155, 24615, scroll down to number 5, and then you would find safety monitor. But in this case, we can click on safety monitor requirements, hit the HTML, and there we are. Those are the requirements for the safety monitor system. So it makes it pretty easy to have it on one page. Now, nothing here has changed. It's just, in this case, it's just organized in a different area for easier access for everybody, okay? No change to that. And we can also see that these are all effective October 1 of this year, okay? And also I like the pages, we can go back and forth really easy and fast. So that scope of the project, fairly narrowly scoped. And when we're combining standards, we had about 5 different standards that we used kind of as templates. So if we take a manhole, we take those 5 standards and we have a manhole that was addressed, the protections in essentially 5 different ways, some just slight, subtle different from the other. Well, we can't have 5 different ways of protecting people, workers from manhole, hazards of manhole. So we have to take one of those. So where there's multiple provisions for the same hazard, we would take the most protective. And 99% of the time, that was the construction standard. Okay? A lot of the other standards were, really quite old, but most of this comes right out of construction. And when we decided, and even in stakeholder meetings, we decided which format to use, it was decided to use the construction chapter 155 part C1 as a template and expand that to everybody. So again, there's more familiarity there. Just makes it easier for everyone. So when you have those differences, and training is one as well, we know, construction standard has training fairly minimal, but if we look at fixed industry, there's quite a bit more to it. So we would take the fixed industry training, and we'll cover that. That's kind of rationale of how we got to where we are. So scope of the standard, this is going to apply to everybody with the exception of our telecom chapter 32 and our qualified electrical workers chapter 45. So for construction, all your stuff is in here, okay? Our assistant director wanted a quick reference guide for everybody. So what we come up with was this, and we'll take a look at, we'll kind of put things at ease a little bit right now. So this is a quick reference to the main, main subsections of the standards. So we have first 3 regardless of height. These are written pretty well as they are in 155 now. So holes, impalement hazards, those are all regardless of height. We have 4 feet or more. And the last one here, we'll talk about that. Don't get too worked up over that one. So skylights, ladders, holes, all those things, those are all 4 feet or more as they are today. There's a couple of subtle differences, a couple of strong, a couple of structural as well. We'll talk about those. So we can see we've got regardless of height. We have fall protection at 4 feet or more like we do today. Then over here they put it's just a link to the main section. Section 200.05 is an implied decimal. It doesn't go to the exact provision, just takes you to that section. And then I know construction, everyone wants to see it. We still have the construction 10 feet. Okay. So with construction, just like any other, just like fixed industry, we've got 0.4. Construction adds the 10 foot in there. And we'll get back to look at those. Water pickers won't affect you folks. Elevating work platforms. So a lot of these other standards, we wanted one standard that could apply to everybody, but the problem with that is there's a lot of subtle differences in specifications and in requirements. They're subtle enough and different enough to where one provision can't apply to all these different conditions. And 2, we have industries that have worked over the years and developed their own specific standards, such as longshore and all of that. So with those, we've created their own sections in here. And one of those being elevating work platforms. It's different enough not to fit in, so we created its own section. And this section is nearly exact copy paste from chapter 869 right now. Powered platforms, that won't affect you folks when we're cleaning. Scaffolds, that's copy paste, still at 10 feet from chapter 874. Which brings up another question. So if we copy paste this out of chapter 874, then if we go to 874, what are we going to see? So if you go to those chapters where the fall protection was taken out of, there's going to be a reference. It'll see for fall protection, see chapter 880. Pretty simple. There's still some referencing, but a lot less than what we had. Cranes, and still what we have, this is right out of 155 Part L. The 6 feet and 10 feet are still there for those conditions. And also with tower cranes, we know that they have, there's guardrails up on the jib and all that. Those guardrails are a little bit different, so they're different enough to where they wouldn't fit in with your other types of guardrail. So we just left that alone. And then we still have references to those folks, but ship repair, longshore, and ski, different areas that have their own standards. It's just copy paste all that is, and we can see they have their different threshold heights as well. So any standard where the fall protection came from, there's going to be a reference in there. Okay, reference to Chapter 880. So if you go to 155 Part C1, fall protection and construction, October 1st, all that information is going to be is repealed, and there's just a reference to this chapter, all that it is. Okay, so that's a quick ref. So then there's also a PDF that everyone's going to get. I threw together, I call it a summary table because I couldn't come up with a better title for it. It kind of works. So it's kind of a quick ref, but expanded a little bit. It gets more into, here's your condition, these are the types of fall protection required, and then some notes in there. So it's a bit of an expanded quick reference. And it's only, I think 10 pages versus the standard being 40 pages. So just familiarity. And like I said, a lot of us will realize it's not much different than what we have today. So in definitions, and again, you can see how much I like the quick ref. There's a lot of talk right now of a lot of new definitions in the standard, and there aren't. There's a couple ways we can look at it. First, we can say that they're all new because it's an all new standard, right? But we took 155 Part C1 fall protection and applied that to everybody. So a lot of these definitions started in there. And then many of the other definitions, like aerial device, that's copy paste from Chapter 869. It's not new. Construction work comes out of 155. It is not new. Elevating work platform, Chapter 869. It's not new. Okay, there's only a couple of new definitions in here that we're going to take a look at. We're not going to look at all of them. You guys know these for years and years. First one we'll look at is feasible. So feasible is only used once in the standard. It's only used in the scaffold standard for erecting or dismantling. And it's talking about they have to provide it if it's feasible and does not create a greater hazard. There's been a lot of varying definitions of this term over the years. Management wanted it defined, so we used OSHA's definition that it's possible to perform the work. So when people say it's infeasible, we want them to understand that how that term is defined and how adjudicative hearings have defined that word, just so that everyone's on the same page for what that word actually means. Okay. There's just a lot of confusion around that one. Like I say, it's only used once. It's used in the scaffold section for scaffold erector dismantler, just as it is in the standard now, but we wanted to be clear to everyone the intent of that. We're not going to go too far with it. Just want everyone to know that it's there. There's a couple of structural changes that we wanted that are quite confusing for a lot of people, and management had requested that we made changes to those and more closely match what federal OSHA does. So we know in Chapter 155 Part C1 and 800-260-10, there's a whole bunch of them, that we have a floor hole and a floor opening. A floor hole is less than 12 inches. A floor opening is more than 12 inches. Then you get into the issue is how is a floor opening? How is a skylight hole a floor opening? You get into floor and roadways and all of that. So we got rid of floor hole and floor opening, and we just have a hole now. And currently a floor hole is anything 1 inch or greater, right? So we went with a hole, a gap or void 2 inches or more in its least dimension floor of other surface. So we've increased the size from 1 inch to 2, and we no longer differentiate between floor hole and floor opening. We just have a hole. This matches what federal OSHA does as well. And if you look at the protection requirements for four holes, they're pretty much identical between floor hole and floor opening. That all holes have to be guarded right now. really what this does is it clarifies what a hole is, sets what everyone feels is a reasonable dimension, and makes it simple for employers to go in and out of state, because a hole in the East Coast is the same thing here. So that's one change there. So we'll see in the standard, instead of a floor hole, you do this, a floor hole or opening, you do that. It's just a hole now. Okay? Another side of that, what do we do with opening? Well, we also matched what federal OSHA had there. An opening applies to a wall or partition. Okay, so hole is the surface they're walking on. An opening is in a wall or partition. That's just what Fed OSHA does there. And the dimensions and everything are exactly the same as what they were, which brings up another point. There's a lot of layers to these things. So when we're putting it together, we have guidelines that we're required to follow. And one of those guidelines was that all numbers have to be spelled out. Okay, so 30 inches is no longer 30, it's spelled out 30 inches. So if you like to scroll through and find 10 and 4 and all those, we're required to do it this way, with the exception of metric system. I'll just leave that there. So if you're scrolling through looking for numbers, they're all spelled out now. Okay, so we have a hole in the surface they're walking on, 2 inches or greater, and an opening is in a wall or partition. Okay, so we no longer have floor hole, floor opening, or wall opening. It's just hole and opening. Okay. A couple of these we'll get back to, like predictable on a regular basis. We'll get back to that one. So it might be too heavy right off. Structural member is another one that will apply to you folks, and we'll come back to that one when I get to that provision in the code. Another one that we'll need to know before we go any further with it is the definition of walking working surface. Okay, so we know right now that our definition of walking working surface includes dimensions of 45 inches or more in all directions, and it also includes an exemption for rolling stock. So it's a pretty heavy definition. There's a lot going on there. Now, if we incorporated approximately, about 19 different standards were affected by this project, and you kind of be surprised how many different definitions there are of walking working surface. So in order to have consistency for everything, we have to have one definition for everybody of a walking working surface, right? Can't go around having different definitions out there. So the other issue was, we know that OSHA had a concern with our 45 inches or more, and how workers were protected if it's less than or more than. And we addressed that, and that 45 inches or more is no longer in the standard. We addressed it a different way. I'm going to cover that. So this definition, and then the vehicles and rolling stock exemption, that was moved. Okay? Moved, not removed, moved. So this definition very closely matches federal OSHA's. It'll apply to everybody, and any surface, horizontal or vertical, on which employee walks, works, or gains access to a work area or workplace location. So it's pretty much anything, except right at the very end we see not including ladders, because we know that fall protection isn't required on a ladder. There's one asterisk to that, other than fixed ladders. But so we specifically put in there that not ladders, right? And we do have those a few more examples of what we consider a walking working surface. Okay, so that's a change in definition there. It's a bit lighter, and it's more specific. Like I say, we'll come back to a couple of these as well. Instead of going through too many all at once and getting too heavy, we'll just come back to those as we go through. So definitions, application, this applies to everybody under the scope of the standard. Like I said, it's everybody except telecom and qualified electrical workers, chapter 45. So the way we look at this is section 100 applies to everybody, right? So that's general requirements, fall protection regardless of height, training, and fall protection work plan at 10 feet or more. So most of this, other than training for construction, you won't see any difference, because this is This is 24605. This is 24607. This is 24611 number 2. It's basically copy paste out of construction. Okay, so section 100 applies to everybody. Okay. Section 200 will apply, and when I say section 200, oops, that's too far. Section 200, the 0, 5, and the 10 are an implied decimal. So this is 4 feet or more. So it'll apply to everybody unless there's a specific provision that addresses that condition in section 300. And construction does have that. This is essentially 24611 that we have now. If you have the codes, I'm testing JC as he's there. So there's a specific provision for construction. This is the construction 10 feet. So 100 applies to everybody. 200 applies unless there's something specific in section 300. And we kind of had to do it that way because there's a lot of, like I say, there's a lot of layers to this and differences. And we also needed to recognize that there are areas in construction where the 4-foot trigger height won't work. So I couldn't think of a better way to do it, so we did it this way. Then we can see what everything is in section 300 there, okay? And then section 400 is specifications. So it's essentially our 24613 and 24615 that we have in construction right now. Only it's broken out a little bit. So instead of having different protections buried within a restraint or an arrest, we broke those out specific for covers, specific for fall arrest systems. Like we already looked at, safety monitor system and safety watch. So further up in section 200, 4 feet or more, you can use a guardrail. You would come down and, okay, what are the specs for a guardrail system? And there they are. Pretty simple there. Same with cover. Now, we'll come back to this, but we did change the weight requirement for covers, and I think everyone will be okay with it. Okay, so for covers, it's right there pretty easy. Like I said, we'll get back to that when we come down to a code and kind of talk it through. So a lot of this stuff is direct copy paste from 155 right now. So it should be pretty simple for everybody. So in general requirements, what is that? Well, this is 155, 24605 right now. Gets into structurally sound surfaces prior to allowing employees on them, right? Number 1. 2, inspection criteria, which is harness, lanyard, everything, and includes nets, right? 3, use personal fall arrest for fall protection and not for rigging, right? You can't use it to support a worker and then support a load. It's one or the other. And then plan for and provide prompt rescue of employees. So the thing we get into these, if we take a bunch of language out of chapter 155 right now, out of C1 right now, we're also leaving other elements of 155 that still apply. So part A includes elements that would still apply even if you're in C1. And one of those being the rescue of employees in the event of a fall. So we had 2 provisions that address that, 155 Part A, and also in Chapter 24, 88050, something like that. So we used the one out of 24. It was written a bit more clear, but they were both fairly identical. So when we have to remember that when we take things out, we have to bring other things that are tied with it. Back to my layer comment, there's a lot of layers to that. So plan for and provide prompt rescue. So if you're, doing some work on a tower crane and they fall off, how are you going to get them off? That's what that's going to. Okay. Plan for and provide prompt rescue. How are you going to get them off there? Okay. So general requirements, again, 1, 2, and 3 are right out of 155. Regardless of height, so 0 feet, so working over or next to dangerous equipment, holes into it. So number 1 is copy paste from all of our standards, same thing. Impalement hazards, number 3, or there's exposure. We just took out the construction specific, it says wood stakes to set forms. We just put wood in there. Impalement means to pierce, so all impalement hazards have to be guarded now under the current standard and under this. One thing that's changed here, this sentence is one that we had to change because it currently uses the term into which employees can accidentally walk. And the concern that OSHA had was the term accidentally is a bit ambiguous, and when is it accidental? And it is a term that OSHA used to have, they changed it. So we changed that to, well, first we have a hole, right? So we changed that from floor opening to just a hole, right? Holes into which an employee can trip, step into, or step through. And this is at 0 feet. So currently we have guard 4 holes and floor openings into which an employee can accidentally walk. We changed it to employer must guard holes into which an employee can trip, step into, or step through. So we know a hole is 2 inches or greater. So meeting the current rules that all holes have to be covered. That's the new language for this rule. Okay, doesn't change it. I think it's more clear on when is accidental. And a question I had recently is maybe it's in a walkway. There's a cutout for a 3-inch pipe later on. Is that a hole? Yes. It's in the middle of the walkway. Would it have to be guarded? Yes, it does today. If it's up next to a wall, would it have to be guarded? A little bit more difficult because we know that we have to have exposure to that hazard. So you have to look at it that way. Doesn't change the requirement, but matches OSHA's language of trip, step into, or step through. So also with that, we have guarding of holes at 4 feet or more. And how do we have 2 rules? One says regardless of height, one says 4 feet or more. Well, we recognize that you can't have a cover over a hole where you're performing work, right? How are you going to put the skylight in or the pipe through? So if you're working at that hole, then it's fall protection required at 4 feet or more, right? And that's in section 200. In this case, if there's nothing going on, it's just in an area where employees are walking through or could walk through, it has to be covered or guarded, just as it does today. And that's how we differentiate between those two, right? Okay. And impalement hazards, same thing we have today. Is there any questions so far? Well, I can drink of water. Okay. So training, we know with construction, and the formatting here is a little rough, but there it is. So the training, and like I said, if we're taking multiple standards, we have to take the most protective. So in this case, the construction standard didn't have much. So we used our training requirements out of Chapter 800, Section 160, which is PPE, and just so happens it pretty closely matches what FedOSHA has for construction and their general industry. I think you'll find there's a lot of words here. Yes, I think you'll find a lot of you are doing this now. You might have to tweak a few things, but we'll just kind of talk through. So provide training for employees exposed to fall hazards. That's all, right? If you're exposed, you have to have training. What is the training? So I like to be able to highlight that way. Each affected employee trained by a competent person know at least the following: nature of hazards, when, what, procedures, use, limitations, proper care, and requirements of this chapter. Seems like a lot, yeah, but if we look at it, you take two different groups. If you let's just take a basic roofing company where all they do is re-roof houses, and all they're using is a harness and a lanyard, a rope grab, and a ridge anchor. In that case, the training is going to be fairly basic and fairly simple because that's all they're training on. That's only fault protection that they use and need. You wouldn't need to train them on a monitor system and guardrails, warning lines, and all of those. So training needs to be specific to what it is that they're doing or what it is they might be using. Okay. If you take another group, for example, say big commercial construction where they're doing a lot of different things, then sure, the training is going to be expanded because they're going to be using multiple systems there, right? I think a lot of you are probably doing this now with the training you have. Even the manufacturer's book is going to cover much of that. Additionally, what's in there is demonstration requirements. For employees allowed to perform work, the employee can demonstrate an understanding of the training and demonstrate the ability to use. So I had a few questions on that. And the way we've looked at it, and this language has been used in Chapter 800 since 2001, could you use a written test for that? Sure. Nothing says that you can't. You could do a verbal test. It doesn't say how, it just says that the employee, just that's demonstrated, okay? Then also demonstrate the ability to use. And we've all seen workers, myself being one of them, you sit through a video or something and then you're asked to go do X and you really don't know what you're doing. I can say that because I've been there. The intent of this provision is that the employee understands the training that's been provided. And like I said, that protects the employer as well because the employee is paying attention and can demonstrate that. Go back to a photo that was sent to me from Eastern Washington where you had a worker on a roof who had all of these training documents but didn't understand it. He had his harness lanyard on with a rope grab, and the rope grab, or not the rope grab, was in a carabiner. The carabiner was attached to his leg strap. He thought what he was doing was correct. So with demonstrate the ability to use and an understanding, those are both very important. And also something else, does this have to be at the same time as the rest of the training? There's no requirement for that. It doesn't say it has to be at the same time. Another conversation with the group, you can do your classroom-based stuff one day, and then a week or so later when the employees are actually going to go on a roof or wherever they're going, then you can do your demonstration. It doesn't have to be at the same time. It could be any time. Okay? And then retraining, that's in there. Same stuff as we see elsewhere, changes in the workplace, types of fall protection used, or work habits, and then documentation. So what has to be documented? Name of each employee, the date of training, subject, and fairly basic stuff. We have name or signature of the competent person who conducted the training, and that come out of our current standards and FedOSHA. Our stakeholders asked that we add some others in there. So signature of employer or employer's designee. The idea being that if an employer recognizes or just doesn't want to do the training, maybe they recognize that they're not trainers and they hire a third party, that's fantastic. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But we want to recognize that the employer can sign for the training or the employer can designate someone else, have their signature. So maybe you go to a third party and the employer buys off on that training. That's the employer's designee, and that is accepted. I think it's great if people recognize they can't or don't want to do it. They have someone else. That's fantastic. That's the idea, is to get the training across. But so that there is some layer there that the training is appropriate and it's not simply just an online PowerPoint that people just click through, right? And then everyone's favorite document may be stored electronically. As long as it's available, there's nothing wrong with electronic storage. You really have to put your squints on for that one. But there you go. So that's training. Like I say, a lot of you are probably doing that now. Probably meet most of that now. I think the bigger one may be the signature aspect. But we put those extras in there so that anybody the employer designates can be the signature on that. Okay. And then fall protection work plan. So this applies to everybody, fixed industry and construction. This language is pretty much copy paste from construction 155 24611 number 2. Looking at Tony when I say that. All language is pretty much the same, and we know that a fall protection work plan is required at 10 feet or more. And that there's also the training aspect that goes back to training these elements. And the idea being that the idea of this provision is that the potential for injury from between 4 feet or 10 feet is quite a bit greater. So the potential for injury, we're looking for a little bit more of a plan of how you're going to do things to prevent that fall at 10 feet. That's the idea behind this. So can we use the same templates that we have now? Absolutely. The language didn't change. The only thing that's different is just the code number. Okay? As long as you meet those elements, you can make your own templates. You can take this off as a PDF and use that. You can do a lot of different ways. Language hasn't changed. The applicability has changed to fixed industry as well. And it's the same thing that construction has had for quite some time. So that's an easy one for everybody there. So we're really going to go through section 200, 300, 005, and hit a couple other things. We'll go through fairly fast for construction because not all of it applies. So this section will apply to everybody. So if your condition in construction, if your conditions are addressed here, like holes and openings and things like that, then yeah, this will apply to you. So number one is kind of a catch-all. What we generally like to do is have specific provisions for specific conditions. The idea that when you don't emphasize something, take like a skylight, when it's not emphasized in a standards, tend to be de-emphasized in people's mind as a hazard. So we didn't want to take things out and group a lot of things into just a whole, because then people are left to extrapolate what is it the department's actually asking for. So we left a lot of those in here and actually expanded a little bit. And that's based largely on stakeholder request. They don't want to take those things out because they like what it says, and then, you know, they can kind of hold the department liable. Well, that's what that says. So the first one is kind of a catch-all. It says except as required in 2 through 10. So 2 through 10 are the specifics. So guarding of ramps, runways, and inclined walkways. 3 is holes with a lot of subs in there. 4 is openings. 5 is reinforcing. 6 is steep pitch roof. 7 and on down. So if the specific condition doesn't have a specific subsection, then we would look at this provision number 1. Okay. So what it requires at 4 feet, it requires it 4 feet or more above the ground or lower level, right? And then we can use a standard guardrail. We can use personal fall restraint, arrest, safety net, catch platform. Those are our options. What if we're using an option that isn't listed there? Well, if you're using an option that isn't listed there and the employee is protected from the hazard, then it would meet the intent of the standard, right? So there's some sub-items in here, and these sub-items are the same things we have today in Chapter 155 with one stakeholder addition. So first one we have using stilts. The height of the top rail equivalent member of the guardrail has to be increased. That's been in the standard for quite some time, right? There's one addition in here where employees are working on platforms. We added ladders, and that was added when that was added in 2016, even before I started this position. So we first started working on this. Stakeholders requested we added ladders in there. So does that mean that you have to have fall protection on a ladder? No. What it says is you're working on platforms or ladders above the protection of the guardrail, either increase the height of the guardrail or implement another fall protection system. Okay, so picture a worker on a 5th floor balcony and they're on a portable ladder right on the edge next to a guardrail, and they're up 6 or 8 feet. I think in that case, most everyone would agree it's an issue. So in that case, you can increase the height of the guardrail, or you can provide personal fall arrest type of system. You can do that either way that you wanted to. Okay. So that's really the only change in here, platforms or ladders above the protection of the guardrail. Both construction and fixed industry were largely on board with those. Ramps, runways, and inclined walkways, again, 4 feet or more. Holes, so no longer is it floor openings. It's holes, right? So we changed that term. The language is a little bit different. So holes, an employer must protect employees from falling into or through holes 4 feet or more. And remember the language we had earlier was trip, step into, or step through, right? This language is fall into or through. So we can see that the language is different and get the question, well, how big does the hole have to be before someone can fall through it? Too many variables there. Size of the worker, things that they're doing. So you have to look at it, and can an employee fall into or through it? And more than just one leg, because that would be step into, right? So if an employee can fall through, then it's going to be fall protection at 4 feet or more, right? If they can't fall through it, but they're working at it, or it's less than 4 feet, you don't have to do anything. Once they walk away, though, then we know that fall protection is going to be regardless of height, because someone can trip, step into, or step through. right? You understand how we're differentiating between those two there. If they're working at it and can fall into or through, it's 4 feet or more. And it's going to be based on what they're doing. I know currently it says, you know, a floor hole is less than 12 inches, a floor opening is greater than. It really doesn't say that an employee can't fall through at 12 inches, especially if you look at the diagonal, difference of sizes of people. That's how we're differentiating between those two in the standard. And this matches pretty close to what the language there is the same as what federal OSHA has as well. So it kind of says, regardless of height and 4 feet, but if we look at the language, we see that it is a little bit different, falling into or falling through versus step into, step through. Okay? So we have just generic holes there and with the different types of systems. And then skylights, that was a concern of OSHA's, that the language right now says whenever there's exposure, something like that, use the term whenever, which is kind of weird in the code to use the term whenever. I don't disagree. So we broke that into two different items. And this gets, so the first one, unprotected skylight hole, right? You're on a roof, there's no skylight in it, you have a hole. Everyone would agree that fall protection is currently required there at 4 feet or more, right? Or 0 feet if they're not working at the hole, right? The second one more clearly breaks out the whack in Chapter 155. The skylight's been installed and is not capable of supporting without failure. So essentially what we're saying there is if the skylight is a typical plastic bubble that's been there for 30 years, is that plastic bubble rated, and could it support an employee should they fall on it? We've had that over the years where people lean against it and go through. Brutal thing, but this more clearly, it breaks out the standard instead of having, I think it's whenever in there, more clearly matches federal OSHA and also gets into what we're actually looking for in a more clear way. Okay, so if there's no skylight in there, we agree we have a hole. If there's a skylight there, the skylight has to be rated for an employee, essentially a cover, right? We see a lot of them anymore. So now we go into a cover. So we change the strength requirements for a cover, and we did that to make it easier for everybody. Okay. So currently the standard says capable of supporting 200 pounds with a safety factor of 4. So stakeholders pretty frequently said, well, why make us do the math? Why don't you just say 800? Well, that's a good concern. But even then, if it says 800 pounds, is 800 pounds enough? Going back to what the intent of that is that whatever cover you're using is that it can support the workers, right? So instead of debating what the strength is, and most people don't know what the strengths of a piece of three-quarter plywood are, there's several manufacturers in the state of Washington that manufacture covers and skylights, and I call them. They advertise on their website that skylight or cover meets OSHA requirements, and I ask them, does that meet Washington requirements? And they're usually like, what? Is it different? Possibly. So we went with what federal OSHA had in the language, right? So kind of back to that. Do we know that a cover that meets OSHA's requirements, do we know that it will or won't meet ours? No, we really don't. So we wanted some consistency with language there and make it clear. And that if people, there's one over in Paulsville I talked to, that if people use a cover that meets OSHA standards, there's no reason why it wouldn't meet ours because we're talking about supporting an employee. So we changed the cover strength requirement to support without failure at least twice the weight of employees. So what does the cover have to do? Support without failure. How much? Twice the weight of employees, equipment, materials. Okay, so support without failure is that line there where it starts to fail. Twice the weight is a safety factor. Okay, so if it can support without failure, then we're good. Okay, so if we go to, so part of my part of my scheme, I don't come up with a PowerPoint. I just like to walk through the code a little bit, so there's familiarity there. So we can come back to this one. Let's go take a look at covers quickly. So what's the requirement for a cover? And we can see, so 1A is the same, conduits and trenches. 1B is the strength requirement for a cover. 1B, imagine if you will. Hole covers is capable of supporting without failure at least twice the weight of employees' equipment materials may be imposed on the cover at any one time. So we got rid of the 200 pounds of safety factor of 4. We don't have potential in here. We don't have, what some felt is a bit of a moving target for that. And again, if it matches federal OSHA, more than adequate. It isn't a reduction in standard at all, and I don't think it increases it at all. Okay. If you're using something, like I said, if it meets OSHA, no reason why it wouldn't do the same thing here. Okay. And to a lot of people's delight, there's no more math to do. It's funny to me. So back to that one with holes and skylights. So skylights and skylight holes, again, if there's no cover over it, no skylight in it, it's a hole, has to be protected. If there's a skylight on it, it doesn't meet the requirements as to be a cover, it has to be protected. Okay, just as it is today, we just changed the language a little bit. We have hatchways and chutes, ladderways or platforms. None of this has changed. Guard pits and trap door holes, some of this come out of our fixed industry standards. Repair pits and service pits, that's new. And obviously wouldn't apply not likely to apply for you folks. This is more of the Jiffy Lubes and things like that. OSHA did address this in their standard, in their general industry standard, and we didn't want to not address it because, like I said, it tends to de-emphasize as a hazard, and people are left to extrapolate on their own what the intent is. I think it's important to have the intent in there so everyone knows. Guarding openings, again, instead of guarding the wall openings, it's just changed to openings now. The language underneath it is all the same, just a different term. Reinforcing work, it's out of 155C1. Steep pitched roofs, so greater than 4 and 12, regardless of activity. That's 24609 right now. Low pitched roofs, so this is other than roofing work and other than constructing the leading edge. Those are in a different section. Again, this is 4 feet or more. So other than roofing or constructing the leading edge. Okay. The safety watch system, if you use that, we know that there were concerns with our safety watch system, but we did keep it. We just added a couple of different provisions in there for that. And largely this will apply to like service techs and things like that, working on HVAC units and things like that. Or anybody needs to be doing that sort of work, but it is still there and we'll cover that. Hazardous slopes is the same as what we have in the construction standard now. And then number 10, vehicles and rolling stock. Okay. This doesn't apply to construction activities. The construction exemption is in section 300, but I want to talk about this one because I don't want people to look at it thinking everything changes, and it really doesn't. This is going to apply to essentially fixed industry. Okay? Employees exposed to fires of 4 feet or more to the ground or lower level from vehicles or rolling stock on which employees must be located or perform their job duties are protected by arrest, restraint, positioning. Okay? The issue with this one was that we have a lot of fixed industry employers who are loading construction materials on their trucks or loading trucks in general. And given that they're loading the same product, say a load of joists or a load of rebar or structural steel, whatever it is, how is it different in a fixed industry setting than in a construction setting where construction has a specific exemption and fixed industry doesn't have anything? Because currently there really isn't anything other than a couple of interpretations out there. So fixed industry specifically requested that we put language in the standard that addresses that if they can provide fall protection, they will, but that the department kind of recognizes that if they can't, that they can't. because there's a lot of times when they can't do that, right? So kind of went both ways with this one, and where the department's recognition part, you kind of have to put your squints on for this one. Where suitable anchorages cannot be provided, or when the use of fall protection creates a greater hazard, work may be performed on vehicles or rolling stock without a fall protection system. So there's a term in there we need to look at first, and it's suitable, right? We didn't use the word feasible. Management said no to the word feasible. So we use suitable. Suitable, just so happens, is currently defined in Chapter 155, Part A. Like I say, probably doesn't apply to you folks, but I want to talk about it so that we understand who it applies to. So if we go down to suitable, so suitable, that which fits or has the qualities or qualifications to meet a given purpose, occasion, condition, function, or circumstance. So that provision specifically talks about the suitability of an anchor, right? So not only does the anchor have to meet a given strength, we know that, but it also has to be in a location where it can perform its specific function. So if your anchor is overhead and you're tied off, everything's fantastic. But what if your anchor is 20 feet over here and you have to walk across the back of a truck? You're going to hit the ground before the anchor can do anything. So in that case, the anchor you wouldn't be able to provide a suitable anchor in that condition, right? And also we look at it is, that's one example, creating a greater hazard. We've got companies that would do a vertical lifeline, but they have an overhead crane with however number of volt bus bars. So if you put a vertical lifeline next to a high voltage bus bar to operate the crane, well, then you have a greater hazard there of electrocution. So the anchor has to be suitable for that condition, and it can't create a greater hazard. So we kind of balanced that standard out with, if you can, you can. If you can't, then we get it. And given what vehicles and rolling stock are, I agree it's a difficult thing. OSHA has a letter of interpretation on that if the vehicle is contiguous with a structure, then fault protection may be appropriate. So we'll leave it there. So it may. But like I said, that's a fixed industry provision. You know, for some of your materials when they're being loaded up at whatever facility they're being loaded at up, it would apply there. Okay, and go back to that one. That's number 10, all the way at the bottom. It would apply there. And construction exemption, we're going to take a look at that next, almost next. Okay. Is there questions about the 4 feet? Again, if you're familiar with 24609 in Chapter 155, it's pretty much that, except for a couple of tweaks and a couple of additions. Everyone should be familiar with that, right? So 20010. So we also included. So we go back and forth on what is construction and what isn't. We have definition of construction. There's a lot of gray area in there. The exemption for fall protection in this section. So when OSHA came up with their walking working surfaces standard, which was fall protection for general industry, they included the same exemptions, nearly the same exemptions as they do with the construction standard. Okay, none of those, we modified the language a little bit, but they're still there. So these apply to non-construction applications as well. First one, initial installation of the anchor prior to work or after or disassembly. Makes sense that you have to go onto a roof that we're going to put an anchor in, you have to go out there, right? So if there isn't something already installed or you have to go to tie off, that's acceptable. It kind of has to be. And also we have when employees are inspecting, investigating, or assessing conditions prior to start of work or after all work activities completed. The intent of this is that someone can go on a roof, see what needs to be done, measure for materials, what kind of tools am I going to need, get that taken care of, then go back up, install fall protection, do the work, and then come off there. Okay, the worker or the inspector isn't going to go into a danger zone is a term that we use to do the work. So meaning they're not leaning over an edge, they're not taking off a skylight cover, things like that. They're not necessarily exposed to a hazard of an unprotected side or edge or a hole. and for any length of time. That's the idea of that provision, that it would take longer to put the fall protection in than the work to be done. We also have when it doesn't apply on steep pitch roofs where construction is underway. So if there's construction work going on, such as a re-roofing project, and someone goes up there to inspect or assess, well, the potential for exposure to hazard is greater because of that construction work that's going on, right? And we applied this to construction as well, and this come out of federal OSHA. So we know more and more there are buildings out there with fall protection systems in place. And this exemption isn't an exemption just to have an exemption. It's exempted for a specific reason, and that's the duration of exposure, not going into a danger zone. But if there's a system there that can be used, so can be used, what I mean by that is it meets the requirements of the chapter, right? If it meets the requirements of the chapter, there's no reason why it couldn't be used. In a lot of cases, like a flat roof, you're going to need a horizontal lifeline all the way around. And I had a question yesterday from some of our consultation staff. What if they go on to a roof of a house and there's an anchor there from a re-roofing project last year? Do they have to use that? And I guess the answer would be maybe, because it goes back to meeting the requirements of the chapter. So in order for you to use any anchor, and we know that, you'll have to go up, you'll have to inspect it to ensure that it has all 12 of the screws that are supposed to be in it instead of the 2 they had when they put it in, right? So it has to be inspected and will actually meet the requirements. If it doesn't meet the requirements, then it wouldn't be expected you use it, okay? It also comes in, what if you have to remove roofing materials? Well, same thing. We can't require you to remove roofing material to inspect that. Either it does or it doesn't. But generally speaking, in most cases, it'll have to be like a horizontal lifeline system. And we're also looking at location of an anchor as well. So if you go onto a roof that's 100 feet wide and the anchor is all the way over here, but you have to be all the way over there, it's going to be a long rope, right? And if you're only 30 feet up, you have that swing fall to deal with. So is that anchor designed, installed in a location that could be used to protect from a fall? Generally speaking, it's a yes or a no. Okay. And then we have the same examples that we have currently in the standard. Okay, and this is pretty much identical to what we have also in construction. We'll talk about it again too, so everyone clearly understands that. So 3005 is really short.
Hey, Eric.
Yes.
Hey, quick question that just came up. If the requirements for poles and rolling stock apply to flatbed.
Hey, Tony, you got a double echo coming through.
So that provision in section 200.5 number 10 will apply to essentially fixed industry. It won't apply on construction because that's right here, number C at the very bottom. This is the construction right here. We'll just get that out of the way right now.
Okay. Yeah, I know we had a lot of debate during the stakeholder meetings.
Yeah.
How that would apply to truck drivers. So when they're out, so my understanding was when they're at the facility and they're working on the deck of their trucks, they have to have the fall protection.
Well, maybe.
Get to the construction site,
right?
They don't necessarily need that.
Exactly. So so if they're alongside the road, if the truck is alongside a road or at a facility to load up, do they have to use fall protection? It's going to depend on the circumstances, whether suitable anchorages can be provided. So it's a maybe. Construction, and generally speaking, when we think of construction, there isn't any place to tie off to anyway, right? And trying to reorganize the site to where you can pull up next to it and do all of that. So so in fixed industry, it's maybe, but it still has to be evaluated for. In construction, it's specifically exempted. Okay, and there's a longshore exemption and some other ones, but we won't get into those. But good question. So construction work, right? This is specific to construction, activities that aren't in section 200. So the first one there, again, we have to look for the TEN and not the number 10. So 10 feet or more, right? So we have engaged in roofing work on a low pitch roof. So that's 10 feet. We have constructing a leading edge. That's 10 feet. The same note there, if they're not doing roofing work or if they're not constructing leading edge, it's back to 4. Same note that we already have. And this is new for everybody. It'll take me a minute to explain it. Engage in the erection and replacement of structural members. So currently C in chapter 155, 24611 is work on any surface that doesn't meet the definition of a walking working surface. And we define that currently as 45 inches or more in all directions. I just had a bit of a concern with that, in that how is it that that surface being, 44 by 44, how is that worker protected when a worker on a surface that's 46 by 46 would have, 4 feet, and with legitimate concern, because size of the surface doesn't have a lot of role in, especially at that size, a lot of role in the ability to provide fall protection. So we looked at was, it's the activity, and generally speaking, the activity which we're trying to address. So this section we have engaged in, we have constructing, we have engaged. So it's the activity that the workers are performing that reduces the ability to have fall protection there, right? So I came up with this, erection and replacement of structural members. So what do we mean by that? Well, lo and behold, we have a definition. Right there. Everybody gets to watch me try to remember my alphabet here. Structural member, a member that's a constituent part of any building or structure. So when a worker is actively engaged in the placement or erection of a structural member, then the threshold height of 10 foot would apply. Okay, and we also have examples here in what a structural member is. Columns, girders, beams, trusses, joists, similar supporting members. I'm going to move this out of the way because I can't see, of a building or structure. OSHA differentiates between steel and concrete and wood, and in some cases even aluminum and composites, where, if I did construction for a lot of years, and placing a steel beam wasn't a whole lot different than placing a wood beam or a concrete beam. The task is largely the same. It's just made of a different product, different material. So we get what a structural member is, right? Girders, beams, trusses, joists, or similar. So whenever you have a similar there, you can't name them all. You just kind of get them close to what we're talking about. So if we go to C, so employee that's engaged in the erection or replacement of those members, then they would get 10 feet. So to the question is, under this standard, can an employee still walk the top plate of a wall? Yes. If they're actively engaged in setting joists, rafters, beams, girders, all of those things. Yes, they can. They can't walk it just to walk it. They have to be engaged in an activity, right? So the answer is yes. Same thing goes with, standing walls in some cases. So there's also an exception here. So we know that currently, if you're on that surface that's 45 inches or more in all directions, then you're at 4 feet, right? If it's less than 45, then you're at 10 feet. So if you're placing those members, and I think back to, maybe you're setting a steel columns on a high rise in Seattle. You raise you go up a level, you deck it, you set your columns, you go up a level, you deck it. So if you're placing those columns from a decked floor, whether it be plywood or steel, then it goes back to 4 feet, just as it would be applied today because the surface is greater than 45 inches or more. If you're placing those members, like you have a wall and a floor joist, yeah, that's 10 feet. You have a girder to a beam, yeah, that's 10 feet because there is nothing above you to tie off to a lot of times, and kind of matches how we're applying that now, but we had to address it more clearly to an activity, and it kind of more clearly aligns with some of the different threshold heights that federal OSHA has as well. So is the 10 foot still there? Yes. The 45 inches or more is no longer there, and it's based now on the activity the workers are engaged in. Okay. Then we also have engaged in excavation and trenching operations. So for 10 feet, we have 4 things we can do: roofing work on a low pitched roof, constructing a leading edge, erection and replacement of structural members, and excavation and trenching. So if you think residential, then yeah, you're constructing you're setting the members, you're constructing a leading edge, and roofing a low pitched roof. Well, it's all 10. The only thing that's really different in that one is C, based on an activity versus the size of the floor or the size of the surface that they're on. Again, the same exemptions that we have, we just talked about in section 2005. So we did tweak these a little bit. So we have the exemptions in 2 places to limit how much referencing is going back and forth. And that was stakeholders' request there. I don't disagree with that. But we couldn't have 2 different types of exemptions for everything in there because it goes away from the intent. And then again, we had to keep, we have to meet OSHA requirements as well. So we had to match both of those. So same thing, initial installation removal of the anchor, inspecting, investigating, or assessing roof level conditions. That's the same. I think we added in here and it says, I think it's construction activity now. I always end up looking that way. But we did add in this statement to match that of the other provision in section 200. If there's fall protection system or equipment that's already there and installed for use, then we were required to be used. And again, we go back to the exact same conversation that we had, is does that system that's already there meet the requirements of the standard? If it doesn't meet it, then we can't require you to use it, right? If it does meet it, then there isn't any reason why we can't, right? And the same examples, what we do and don't recognize, copy paste. And then the construction exemption for vehicles and rolling stock, that's 30005 2C. So we took that out of that definition of walking working surface and moved it all the way down to the end there for that specific exemption. There it is. Is there any questions about the 10 feet? JC, how are we doing? He's smiling, so we must be good. Okay, so that's the 10 feet. It did change a little bit, but I don't think it's too far from what we have now because it's based on the activity, right? So we get into order pickers. We're not going to apply to you folks for elevating work platforms. There's only one change that we made in here. The formatting it's kind of weird because the requirements start at 2, 3, and 4. So number 2 is vehicle mounted. So, a lot of our telecom folks and qualified electrical workers will use vehicle mounted, so it's mounted on a truck. Subsection 3 is manually propelled and self-propelled. So these are scissor lifts, right? Scissor lifts that we normally see. The one thing that we added in here is currently the standard says this. Must be used by all persons if required. And there's a period. And people always ask, required by whom? Well, it's required by, we added in there by manufacturer of the platform, because we don't enforce an employer's rules or general contractor's rules. If the manufacturer of the platform requires it, we would require it, okay? So that just clarifies it. The provision hasn't changed at all. And then, so this is, if you're checking up on me, 60031G, and this is 60040 out of chapter 869. So boom lifts, before you go up, you have to be tied off to it. There's no change in that language at all. The only thing that we're looking at is this clarifying statement, and we have different code number that we're looking from. Okay, so fall protection requirement there is the same. And usually there's a question, are we going to update our chapter 869 based on a new ANSI? There's no talk of that yet. So I don't know. Powered platforms, that's chapter 870. That's permanent stuff. We're not going to deal with that. Window cleaning is chapter 878. we're not going to go there with this group. It's all copy paste from those standards. Scaffolds, this is out of chapter 874. And there's quite a bit here. Again, the formatting is kind of brutal, but it's all copy paste from what we have now. We've moved things around just a little bit, but it's still the 10 feet for a scaffold. Each employee on a scaffold, 10 feet or more. And then also we have the erecting, dismantling right there, which is the same as what it is. And there's the word feasible for everyone to know where that is. It's all the same. It's just going to be moved. So if you go to chapter 874 for scaffold, you're just going to see a reference there to chapter 880 for fall protection. That's all that is. Okay. Scaffold cranes, copy paste out of there. Won't worry about those. So I guess we get into specs now. I'm not going to go through all of them. Okay, we're nearly there because there really isn't a change. Guardrail system is 39 to 45. I think the biggest change people see in there is that you can't look for a 3.9 or a 4.5. It's all spelled out, which I don't know. It is what it is. The only change we made to this was toe board specs. So currently it says 4 inches nominal. And then during stakeholder meetings, everyone said, why don't you just, if 4 inches nominal is 3.5, why don't you just say 3.5? I'm like, well, that's fantastic logic. I like that. So we changed the toe board to minimum 3.5 inches in vertical height. So if you're using a 2x4 or a 1x whatever, there you go. It eliminates confusion, right? Other than that, these are all the same. We reorganized a little bit, but left it alone. No change there. And if we go guardrails, ramps, runways, that's the same covers. We looked at that already. Capable supporting without failure at least twice the weight of employees' equipment materials. That's the only change here. We did move things from a different section for barriers for use in wall. I can't say wall openings anymore. Just have to say openings. I have to catch myself in that. That's the only change in that one was the weight requirement. So if you have one that says meets OSHA under this, it would be acceptable if it still meets OSHA after being on a job site. Personal fall arrest equipment specs, these are all the same we currently have. Vertical and horizontal lifelines, where the D-ring is located, requirements for stopping a fall. We did add one thing to that. So, and the further up, we know anchor strengths, 3,000, 5,000, or safety factor of 2, all the same stuff. But we do have 3A, where it says be rigged to allow a maximum free fall of 6 feet, nor allow an employee to contact any lower level. So that statement does 2 things. The 6 feet addresses the distance the fall is and the amount of force that's applied to the body and the lanyard and the anchor, all that stuff during a fall. And obviously we know what contact at lower level. If they can hit the lower level, they're not protected. But we also know that we have a lot of workers who tie off at their feet. They don't have any choice because they're building the structure as they go up. So if you're tied off at your feet with a 6-foot lanyard, you're going to fall more than 6 feet. So technically it's a violation of the code right now, right? However, what we added in there, and this is based on some OSHA stuff, free fall may be more than 6 feet, provided the employer can demonstrate, I can move everybody so I can see. The manufacturer designed the system to allow a free fall of more than 6 feet, and the system is designed and tested to ensure maximum resting force of 1,800 pounds. So the free fall of 6 feet goes back to that max arresting force. So what this provision says is that if you're using a system that's designed for foot level tie off, some people call them 12-foot lanyards, call it what you want. If it's designed for that application, the code now allows you to use it without having to go through variants and all of those things. So how do you know if your system is designed for foot level tie off? Well, you just have to read the back and it'll tell you there. So this is, it clearly addresses what a lot of workers are using right now. We had several general contractors that wanted that language in there because they have a lot of subs who do foot level tie off and say that, well, since there's no code, I don't have to do that. And well, let's just kind of meet this where it is. And if there's a system designed for that, fantastic. And a lot of them, capital safety and all those folk, great products that meet that requirement. Then we have a code that allows it. Right? So take a look at your lanyards, right? The rest of that stuff is all going to be the same. And fall restraint systems, personal fall restraint systems. So we broke it out from just fall restraint, which includes guardrails and safety monitor and safety watch and warning lines, to personal fall restraint. We know harness, lanyard, and all of that. No change in any of that. Positioning as fall protection requires a body harness, which is different than positioning for an ironworker, building a column or a wall. That's work positioning versus positioning as fall protection. Those are different things, like a wall belt with the D-ring and the hooks. Self-rescue, no change in any of that. Warning line, no change in that. We still have the 6 foot, 10 foot for roofers and 15 feet for everybody else. The only thing that was changed in there was requested by OSHA that it went from 200 to 500 pounds for tensile strength, but for like a rope or a cabling is what it was. Safety monitor system, we looked at that. That's no different than what we have for construction now.
Here.
Yes.
Okay, so another question in the chat. Can the fall protection plan be electronically stored on a worker phone or tablet while on the job, or does it have to be a physical paper form?
So prior to meeting employees, let's see, be available on site for inspection by the department. So the provision doesn't specifically require it to be written. Well, it doesn't require it to be paper, let me put it that way, because we know the term written has a little bit different definition nowadays. Yeah. So it requires it to be paper. So the idea of the fall plan is that hazards have been identified, methods of protection employees from those hazards have been identified, and employees have been trained in those methods. So if it's on a phone or a digital device and employees have been trained, the intent is met. So that would be available, yeah. So it doesn't specifically require paper. Digital is okay. And nothing wrong with that at all. Yeah. Good?
Good.
Okay. Safety watch system, we modified a little bit. It was kind of like a modified safety monitor. There were some concerns with our safety watch system. So we put a couple of different provisions in there. Management wanted to keep it because we feel it is effective. So when one employee is conducting a repair work or service equipment on a low pitch roof, but we added in there, not within 6 feet of the edge, and where exposure to falls is infrequent, not unpredictable, on a regular basis. So to address the concerns as best we could, we put in that distance from an edge, 6 feet. And generally speaking, when this was originally put together, it was, a lot of the HVAC service industry was put together for those folks. And it makes a lot of sense because the fan or the HVAC unit's going to be in the middle and not out at an edge, okay? So then we have where exposure to falls is infrequent, not unpredictable, on a regular basis. We defined that, and we kind of have to take our definitions we have in our mind of what those terms mean and kind of hold them to the side. See if I can get this to go. I'll explain what I mean by that. So this definition came from our Chapter 800. I think it's section 99 or something like that, where we would require fall protection. So currently 800 is basically guardrails, but if guardrails are prohibitive because you rarely ever go up there, then you can use other fall protection if it's not on a infrequent, predictable, regular basis. So we defined it in there. We tweaked a little bit to be gender neutral. So if the work is, in this case, predictable and regular, is defined as once every 2 weeks or 4 employee hours over 4 weeks. So that provision says not on a predictable and regular basis. The intent being that service industry, or, could even be roofing worker going up to do a repair as well. They're allowed to use that safety watch, which is that one-on-one system, okay? And the idea being that if a fixed industry employer has to continuously go up to that elevation every day to adjust or do that, well, there's no reason why typical fall protection couldn't be provided. This is just one of those applications where, look, we rarely ever go up there, twice a year maybe. It's going to take X amount of time to put something in. Here's another system that we can use that is effective. And that's the idea with this one, okay? So when we take our definition of it, put it over here, we've defined what predictable and regular is. I had the question yesterday is, let's say a service company, they have a contract to come out twice a year. Well, that's predictable, and it is kind of regular, but does it meet A and B as far as predictable and regular? So that's kind of how we have to put it to the side there, okay? I was surprised that one was actually defined, but it was. So that safety watch and all this other stuff is the same. Safety watch has to be all of those. There's no different in any of that stuff. System that works. For a lot of employers that expressed interest that we kept it, and so we did. I think it's fantastic. Safety net's the same. Catch platform, there's a little difference in there. There was a concern with catch platforms. OSHA standards don't recognize catch platforms. They would just call it a scaffold. So a scaffold has to meet the strength and stability requirements of a scaffold, in our case out of Chapter 874. So we added in there number 3, catch platforms must meet the strength and stability requirements of supported scaffolds in Chapter 874. But made that one simple enough. Okay. And then we have 3 non-mandatory, these are the same thing, no difference in any of that stuff you're familiar with. We have 3 non-mandatory appendices. A and B come out of Chapter 155, Part C1. C come out of Chapter 24, Section 8 something. Good information, didn't want to just throw it away, so we put it in there. So there it is. That's the standard. I think if you're familiar with it, you'll see there's not a lot of difference. There's some small differences in there. Questions about that stuff at all?
We do have one question on the fall protection work plan. Do the workers still need to sign a document or somehow track that they've been trained to that work plan, correct?
So there's no requirement for an employee to sign it, right? It just, the employer has to ensure the employees are trained and instructed in the items. They can do that any way that they want to. I don't disagree that a signature is a good idea, but there isn't an employee signature requirement.
Okay.
So how would we look at that? If compliance was to come out there and we had a fall protection work plan, let's say our template, and there were no signatures on it, wouldn't be a violation. What we would do is ask the employee, what a fall protection work plan is. What was the plan here? And we would just have that discussion. Okay? And we've had times where the employee said, I don't know what you're talking about. And I also had employees say, yeah, he has it in the truck. So there isn't a requirement for a signature. If that works for you, fantastic. But we would interview anyway. That's how that works. Good question, though. Yeah.
Another question came up is, these are going into effect on October 1st. Now, are these going to be citable at that point, or is there the typical 6-month, everybody gets a kind of a warning, slap on the hand?
So there's no phase-in period. Okay. October 1st is the day. Yeah.
Pretty cut and dry.
Yes, correct. So with that, we also have this thing on. So that's a standard. It's online. I like this one. You can see how fast and easy it is to navigate back and forth from different provisions, especially if you're on your phone or something. You can look at it as a web page or as a PDF. It's kind of nice as a PDF. You can print that off and bam, you have it. Take notes there and training and all that stuff makes it easy. I really like this version. You'll see a version through the L&I web page at some point. Hardly anybody's working in the office now. I happen to be for a different issue, but there's that delay there. This one works really well, I think, as far as navigating back and forth and what you actually need. That way you don't have 300 pages when you only need 2 or 3. But also I put together a table, like I said, for lack of better terms and lack of better title. I think the standard on the website is laid out pretty well. We also have that quick reference in the web page that's laid out pretty well. But I kind of wanted something that's a little bit more in the middle, descriptive, to kind of help people acclimate to the new standard, how it's organized in red, and where the sections are. We did have a lot of concern from stakeholders, and certainly I'm no different. But where are these things, and how do you get to? And we just want to make it a little bit easier for people to find things and to meet the standard, instead of calling, I can't find safety monitor system, and then you get into the argument as to why it's considered a restraint system. So I think it was just a little bit more descriptive than the quick ref, but not so descriptive that it would be the actual standard. So I kind of made this in the middle. So we have just the basic section, and then its applicability, and then this would apply to everybody. These 3, regardless of height, those 3 conditions, regardless of height, when, and the types of systems, training. Can be stored electronically. Fall protection work plan. Then if I describe it, it's fairly basic, but it is summary, right? Then we have all of section 200, which is 4 feet or more. And I underline the except. That's for our compliance and consultation folk, not for everyone else, right? There's reason for that. So I kind of say that chuckling a little bit. So we have the 4 feet or more, and again, these are all holes, 3A through, I forget whatever it is, falling into or through, versus further up we see trip, step into, or step through. So we see that the language is different there. And then when you're at those, we have systems that can be used, and then any other notes that could be there. Openings for reinforcing low pitch, steep pitch vehicles and rolling stock. Again, it's not going to apply to construction. That would be, this will be fixed industry. And I have a note there. Also see provisions in 300, because we know 300 is specific to an industry or a piece of equipment, right? Equipment being a scaffold or a labor platform or longshore or window washers, whatever it might be. Then we have the exemptions in section 200, and then laid out here. We don't like bullets anymore, but there they are in bullets. And then the construction 10 feet, laid out nice and easily there, I think. So in excavation, 10 feet when it is not required and when it is required. And then we have the construction exemptions, all 3 of them, just as they were in the standard. So if anyone wants to know, vehicles are rolling stock. I've had 10 phone calls already. No, it didn't change. It's just moved. Yeah. So we know that order pickers are those things that they would use in a warehouse, stuff like that, vertical up and down. We're not going to deal with that. Elevating work platforms. So I did add a little bit of explanatory language here. So 3 is essentially a scissor lift for elevating the work platform if the manufacturer requires it. And a scissor lift is a type of platform that by definition cannot be positioned completely beyond the base. Okay, essentially just up and down. Because we have seen those. I think MEK makes those that have like a little boom in it, right? And we also have boom supported before all persons. And a boom support is a platform that can be positioned beyond the base. So these 2 terms come out of the definitions of that standard to help people identify, well, it only goes straight up and down, but it has a boom on it. So just what does the manufacturer say? And then powered platforms, again, chapter 870, 878 for window cleaners, scaffolds, 10 feet or more. Cranes, that'll vary back and forth to deal with cranes, both, conventional and tower, a little bit different. Ship repair, shipbuilding, different chapters. Longshore, they have their own thing. And ski area, they have their own thing too on the tops of the mountain. Now with this, like I say, it doesn't have everything in it. If it had everything in it, it would just call it standard. It's just a summary of what the requirements are. And then we would know if we wanted more information on a particular system, then we would go to the specs in section 400 of the chapter. So this is just to familiarize yourself. You have it. I've got mine right here, and I take little notes on as we're doing things, and just familiarize ourselves with what's there and how to get to it. Obviously, I know where everything is, but I take a lot of notes on it for questions that come up, and then I can remember those and maybe address those later on, so I don't forget points that are made and questions that are asked. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. So this will be, I think it's going to get emailed out, or if you don't get it, most of you know how to get a hold of me as well. And at the top, obviously, if it's printed off, you can't click on the link, but if you have it digital, you can click there, and that takes you to the legislature site. I do know that our education outreach folks are working on some different materials, some PowerPoints and stuff like that. Hopefully those will be out soon, but that's a different group. I'm not a part of that. So questions about that stuff?
Any other questions?
You either like it or everyone's confused, one of the two.
I know from the stakeholder meetings that this was a highly debated topic. So
yeah, but there's a lot of learning that went on there as far as myself as well, because there's a lot of you're trying to fit a lot of square pegs into a round hole. So there's a lot of give and take to try to make something that'll work. And we have these things that we have to fall within. It's pretty much what we have now in a lot of cases. So that made it easier for people. With some subtle changes that I think are they're more clear as to what we're looking for, and it's language that's used all across the country. And it's a big thing too. If you have an employer coming from Oregon or Idaho, well, why would the definition of a hole or a cover change? It doesn't make any sense. Our Dosh's concern more was the 10-foot threshold height does have uses, and to whittle that down, we stood firm on that. See where it goes, but that's where it is.
So I know I did have one question that going through this jogged my memory. So when dealing with hole coverings and obviously we have to take into consideration not only the weight of the worker, but tools and materials potentially dealing with. What about a fall? So say you're working in an elevator shaft, hauling up some materials, and you got your tool belt and something else, and there's a floor covering below you, and you slip and fall through that covering that you're working above. Now, do you also have to take into consideration the impact forces from said fall?
Yes.
Okay.
And that could be looked at in a couple of different ways. The strength of the cover, or it could even go right here to number 1, structurally sound.
Okay.
You can't look at that it either way. Yeah. If you met one, you kind of met the other. And like you said, with covers, it's not just the worker, and something that we see, I wouldn't say too frequently, but driving a scissor lift over a cover. If anyone's seen one of those tip over pretty readily. So that has to be taken into either keep them off is probably the best thing, but
Unfortunately, I've had to investigate a few accidents with that. So, does anybody have any other questions, comments, or concerns? Well, Eric, I want to thank you for your time today. It was extremely informative. And always, it was good seeing you again. Everybody else, this recording or this meeting was recorded. So I will be getting an email out to everybody with a link to the recording and also a copy of the PDF of the summary table that Eric is providing, and also a link directly to the Unified Fall Protection Standard. If anybody has anything else that they have questions about and they're not thinking about it right now, go ahead and get a hold of me. And I think I'll also include Eric, also include your email when I send out all the information. So people
I could put my email in the chat box if everyone wants that.
That would be great.
If I can spell it.
I'll spell Smith for you.
Yeah. All right. Question, comment, concern, let me know. Happy to help. And yeah, just let me know. And appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk to everybody. And I guess we'll find out in a couple of weeks if this worked or not.
I'm sure. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Good to see everybody as well. Hopefully in person before long, right?
Yes, most definitely.